Shelton Benjamin, one of my all-time favorite wrestlers and one of the most commonly regarded, underrated, and underused wrestlers in WWE history. And a common question that always comes out is, could Shelton Benjamin have been a world champion? And if so, how would he have been a world champion? So I'm going to see if I can answer that question today with a bit of fantasy booking. Of course, we can see Shelton Benjamin here as an intercontinental champion, but he never quite was able to win the big one. And this was actually quite tough to think about, because when I looked back, I could see wrestlers here like Kurt Angle, Brock Lesnar, who had that really legitimate background heading into the first couple of years of Shelton Benjamin's real standout prime, which was 2004 to 2006. And then when you think about the kinds of other wrestlers that were really making it big at that time, it was the rest of Shelton Benjamin's class from OVW, the developmental territory in Ohio. That was people like Brock Lesnar, like I mentioned, John Cena, Randy Orton, Batista, huge class of people. So actually finding a good time for him to win a world title without ruining a lot of other wrestling history was quite tough. But I think I found one thing, and that was the ECW One Night Stand pay-per-view where Rob Van Dam won the WWE Championship. Now, Rob Van Dam is one of my favorite all-time wrestlers as well, so I wouldn't naturally want him to not have his World Championship reign, but knowing now with the benefit of hindsight what we know, which is that he didn't last long as World Champion and sadly had to drop the belt after some separate charges outside of the company, this seems like the only easier choice to allow Shelton Benjamin to slip into play for a World Championship reign. So how I would book Shelton Benjamin as champion is looking here, which is where Rob Van Dam won the Money in the Bank contract. Shelton Benjamin also famously had some very good performances as a Money in the Bank competitor, including that high-risk dive you can see there off the top of the ladder. The previous WrestleMania, WrestleMania 21, he'd done a great run up the ladder to clothesline. I think it was Chris Jericho right at the top. So he's already known as a standout athlete and someone who would have been a good contender to win this. And funnily enough, right at the end of the Money in the Bank match at WrestleMania 22, Shelton Benjamin had jumped onto the ladder and had a bit of a brawl with Rob Van Dam. And it was Rob Van Dam who came out victorious and won the match and then became Mr. Money in the Bank. So the first thing I would do is scrap that and change it so that Shelton Benjamin was the one who bested RVD and he becomes the Money in the Bank winner. Now, what's interesting to go back to Shelton Benjamin is that at this time he was a little bit floundering between what was his mama gimmick, which didn't last too long, where he had a fake mother come in and be his manager for a few months. And then after that, he had a bit more of a flashy gimmick where he was wearing glasses, he was wearing cool shirts, but neither really seemed to fit him too well longer term. The mama thing was interesting, but sadly that didn't last very long. So my thing is, if we're going to remove Shelton Benjamin from those storylines and try to pitch him as a world champion, the key thing here that I'm looking at, or should I say here, is how do we still keep that great highlight memory, which is Rob Van Dam facing against John Cena at the ECW One Night Stand pay-per-view, which is where he cashed in his Money in the Bank briefcase and won the WWE Championship. So my thing is that they still have that match, but the key difference is that rather than have it happen the way it did previously with Edge interfering, instead we have Rob Van Dam going back with Paul Heyman and deciding that they're going to have an initial match to determine who is the ECW World Champion. And Rob Van Dam is Paul Heyman's first choice to be the number one contender for the ECW World Championship. And if you remember, Paul Heyman just gave RVD the belt when he won the WWE Championship. But instead, what I'm thinking is in the build-up to ECW One Night Stand, you have Paul Heyman invite Rob Van Dam up to the ring and offer to give him the ECW Championship. And Rob Van Dam says, no, I want to be the number one contender, but I want to face someone to make sure that I earn the right to be ECW champion, and I want to prove that I'm the best. And the person that I want to beat at ECW One Night Stand is John Cena, the WWE champion, and I want to prove that the ECW World Championship is the best and biggest championship in the WWE. So they're still going to have their match, but this time it's a non-title match for the WWE Championship, but instead it's a match for the ECW World Championship between John Cena and Rob Van Dam. So I'm hoping that there's still lots and lots of heat when John Cena gets to the ECW pay-per-view, because they're going to probably think at this time in John Cena's career, my God, is he going to be the person to win the ECW World Heavyweight Championship from our favorite guy and ruin this big comeback of ECW? So I would have the exact same thing happen in terms of the build to RVD versus John Cena, but instead of it being a cash-in for the briefcase, it's John Cena versus RVD for the ECW World Championship. And the determiner of who has the best belt in the company, / I guess preventing John Cena from becoming an ECW champion and WWE champion. So all that still goes down, but in the background, Shelton Benjamin is the Money in the Bank briefcase holder. And when we have, if you remember, Edge interfering in the match with what was kind of a weird moment where he had a motorbike helmet on and came into the ring and a long cape. Instead, long cape, big jacket, I think it was, but it looked like a cape when he first came out. We have Shelton Benjamin interfering instead, and he's going to debut what I think would be a new finishing move. So if you guys can think about Shelton Benjamin's finishers, I quite like the T-Bone in some ways, his finisher, T-Bone suplex, but it feels more like a signature move. Similarly, Pay Dirt, which is that sort of leaping reverse STO, I like it as a finisher in some ways, but it's a little bit inconsistent with how impactful it lands, depending on how good the person is at selling it. So one overlooked move, I think, in Shelton Benjamin's arsenal is this jumping clothesline that he does from the top rope. And sometimes he does it a bit like a Superman punch, sometimes he does it like a forearm, sometimes he does it like a clothesline. I'm imagining him doing it somewhere either between a forearm or a Superman punch, but he does it a little bit more like AJ Styles' phenomenal forearm, milks it a little bit more before he jumps to do it. And he has like 2 or 3 different ways he can hit this move. I've seen him stand in the corner of the ring and just sort of leap himself up into the corner with his body facing away from the turnbuckle, so just jumping straight up, popping his feet onto the top rope and leaping off. I've seen him do it where he runs up, jumps straight onto the top rope, reverses round and jumps out, and I've seen him springboard off the top rope. So there's a few different ways that he can hit this, which is good. But also it gives him a little bit more of a wow factor that he can throw in. And we've seen from the phenomenal forearm that this can work. So that's my pitch for his new finisher. And he's going to jump off the top rope, hit Cena with that, distract the crowd, I guess, and while the referee's down, Paul Heyman will come in. You still get our friend come in for the 1, 2, 3, and everyone's happy with RVD as ECW champion. But the change up is that Shelton Benjamin comes in afterwards, and he cashes in the briefcase, and he himself becomes world champion. And I had it here, you may have seen that, as the Intercontinental champion, but instead he can either go with this flashy gimmick still, or maybe we can see him afterwards return as the gold standard straight away. But that's my pitch to get Shelton at least initially as world champion. Once he gets there, there's a bit of leeway. I think he might need a manager to really get him over with the crowd. And depending on whether he's a heel or a face, that could change things. I think as a face, maybe you don't need a manager and he's just a guy who's known for having great matches. If he's a heel, Paul Heyman would have been a fit for a good manager, but obviously he was doing the ECW stuff at this time, so you could even try to think, could you bring up Jim Cornette from OVW? Him and Shelton have a history. Is there anyone else at that time who could have been his manager? I don't know, but it feels like someone who would have had to have really given some oomph to his athleticism and his legitimateness. So it felt like Paul Heyman was a natural fit, given that he was a Brock guy. But if not, someone, even a Jim Ross, if he wasn't a commentator, he's always been great at uplifting Shelton's athleticism. But Jim Cornette actually would have been a good fit if he was not going to TNA at that time. But yeah, that's my pitch on how to book Shelton Benjamin as a world champion. Let me know what you think. Would you have done things differently? Would you have timed it differently? How would you have had him continue the run as world champion? Who would he have beaten along the way? Let me know. It'd be great to get your thoughts.